Welcome to How You Livin', a transformative podcast featuring best-selling author, inspirational speaker, and minister, Dr. Rick Rigsby. And now, Dr. Rick.
Hello, friends. Thanks so much for listening. I want to continue our discussion on developing genuine leadership. Genuine leadership is something I define as one who displays influential behavior, the kind of behavior that motivates and inspires others to improve their lives. Growing our influence, I believe this is the foundation for effective leadership. It was author John Maxwell who said it best: leadership is influence, nothing more and nothing less. I believe that leadership is so profound when it is based on a foundation of influence that I have often said influence becomes the trademark of leadership. Our level of influence determines the power of our impact. No influence, no impact. At best, all you can offer folks that are following you is a watered-down version of leadership, something I refer to as impressionistic leadership. Impressionistic leadership, it fits really well. It fits like a glove in our shallow, superficial culture, where being entertained is valued more than learning, where being heard is more important than listening, where looking good is more important than being good. This isn't genuine leadership. This is not authentic leadership. This is not impactful leadership. You may look good and you may sound presentable, but how many people are actually inspired by artificial additives? This is why, friends, it's important to construct a solid, robust, common sense approach to the kind of leadership that makes a difference. Several bricks constitute the foundation for genuine leadership. Let's review, and then I'll introduce a third brick at the conclusion of this episode. First, the very first foundational brick is growth. Growing every single day, making a commitment, a choice to grow every day. Friends, if we're not growing, we're not remaining stagnant, we're going backwards. If we're not growing, we're retarding. John Wooden said it best. You remember John Wooden, the great basketball coach at UCLA. He would tell his players, live today as though you're going to die tomorrow, and learn today as if you'll live forever. Have you ever had a boss or a supervisor who was not growing? Oh, what an experience. You don't want to be that person. They're the ones who know everything. You can't tell them anything. Your suggestions are often met with skepticism. These are the kinds of folks who've been around the world 3 times and talked to everybody twice. There seems to be a real positive correlation, I believe, between a leader who is resistant to growth and a leader who is perceived as ineffective and uninspiring. A few characteristics. These types of leaders function out of their feelings. In other words, they function out of fear. Most often, they function out of insecurity. Why? Because they're always in a posture of being threatened. They're threatened by innovation, threatened by new practices, threatened by new processes and procedures. They're threatened by different approaches or new approaches or different ideas that might lead to someone knowing more about a subject than they do. These folks function out of insecurity. Second, they have a know-it-all attitude. Nothing hinders innovation like a leader who refuses to learn. Nothing stops forward progress like a leader who claims to know everything. These are the folks who simply and unwittingly maintain the status quo. That's what they're all about. Protecting their interests, maintaining the existing requirements. As a result, these leaders offer at the very best a marginalized effort, an effort of average. The rally cry every day from a leader like this, just get the job done. Uninspiring. You know what? Back to John Wooden, who would remind his players, it's what you learn after you know it all that counts. Leaders who are resistant to growth function out of insecurity, have know-it-all attitudes, and third, it's all about getting the credit. Oh, do you know a leader like this? It's not about celebrating group success. It's about, what did I do? What did I accomplish? So-called leaders place individualism over team greatness. The entire team suffers because the motive of the leader is misplaced. Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's longtime associate at Berkshire Hathaway, once stated, "Show me the incentive and I'll show you the results." A leader who is addicted to the response, a leader who believes his or her own press, is dangerously ineffective and alarmingly uninspiring. I want to tell you a quick story. Years ago, perhaps 25 years ago, I was asked to speak at one of the greatest theological seminaries in all the world. I still to this day don't know why they asked me to speak. It's Dallas Theological Seminary. Now, I wasn't going to be just talking to undergraduates and master's students and PhD candidates. I was talking to a world-class faculty. You talk about intimidating. I'm talking about professors like Dwight Pentecost and Charles Ryrie. I'm talking about the authors of study Bibles and commentaries. I'm talking about the great Professor Howard Hendricks. All these folks are heavyweights, and to put it mildly, I was obsessively nervous to the point that I remember mentioning that to my mentor, Dwight Edwards. And he said, "Rick, I just want to remind you of something. When you are obsessively nervous, it's an indication that you're making it all about you." That was great advice. Anyway, I go to the chapel service at Dallas Theological Seminary. I speak, and all I want to do is have lunch with this professor that I highly esteem, Professor Howard Hendricks. At this point, Prof. Howard, as he was affectionately known, is in the advanced stages of a devastating disease that would take his life. And he agreed to meet me in the courtyard for lunch, a brown bag paper lunch, an hour that literally changed my life. We had a wonderful conversation, and then it turned serious. Prof. Howard looked at me and he said, "You know, Richie," he didn't call me Rick or Ricky, he called me Richie. He goes, "You know, Richie, you wowed them in chapel service this morning." Friends, I really didn't wow them, but Prof. Howard said, "You wowed them in chapel service this morning." I said, "Thank you, Prof. I appreciate that." He says, "You know what, Richie? We got donors coming to campus later today, and I will wow them." He said, "Richie, do you know what the problem is with men and women like me and you?" I said, "What, Prof. Howard?" He said, "At some point, we'll start to believe our own press." Translation: at some point, we'll stop growing. At some point, we'll develop this know-it-all mindset. At some point, we will become resistant to change, which means we'll be resistant to growth, which means we will not be effective. The characteristics of a leader who refuses to grow: they function out of their feelings, primarily insecurity. They function with a know-it-all attitude. They're not so much worried about the team, but by their individual successes, and most of all, who gets the glory, who gets the credit. Therefore, a commitment to growing each and every day represents the first foundational brick on which to build genuine leadership. The second foundation piece to genuine leadership: preparation. I'm a graduate of my dad's leadership academy. That's right. That third grade dropout, the wisest man I've ever met in my life. His instructors: issues, obstacles, problems, situations, observation, reading, experiences, all with a teachable spirit. In an earlier episode, I shared how my father taught me about the power of preparation. He traveled the world for his job. He was a cook on a training ship, and every year the cadets at this university, they were required to take a cruise January through March. Every single year, they'd have to go on a 3-month voyage to get them seaworthy. Packing for his annual cruise became a master class in preparation. The ship would depart in January, but my dad would begin packing in December. When the next few months would take you everywhere from Hong Kong to Australia to the Philippines, one must be prepared. And we kids would help Dad pack. One large suitcase, one carry-on that back in the day they called a medicine bag. We'd pack his clothes, and we always found the extras rather curious. Batteries, shoe polish, string. Years later, we would learn that the batteries were for his transistor radio. He always was trying to pick up a baseball game, an international sporting event. Let me just throw in this as an aside. Years later, I'm a young television reporter. I'm covering the San Francisco Giants baseball game this particular day. And I would be back home in the Bay Area. And so I invited my dad to join me. We stayed at the hotel, and the big treat for my dad was after I finished my assignments, I said, Dad, would you like to join me in the press box and meet some of the announcers? And, my dad listened to the San Francisco Giants broadcast religiously every single day, my entire life that I knew my dad. He listened to baseball. We bonded by listening to baseball on the radio. So this was thrilling for him. After the game, we take the elevator from the field level to the press box. And I said, Dad, let me introduce you to the voice of the San Francisco Giants, Hank Greenwald. And what came out of my father's mouth blew me away. He said, Mr. Greenwald, Roger Rigsby, when I would sail on the training ship Golden Bear, I want to say this is back in the 60s, maybe 70s. We'd be around Australia, and with my transistor radio, I would pick up your broadcasts. He goes, Mr. Rigsby, you're absolutely right. I used to broadcast Australian baseball in the International League. So, suffice to say, the batteries for that transistor radio, they were a very important part of my dad's packing. But what about the shoe polish? Well, my father would shine shoes on board. He would shine his shoes, obviously, but he would shine shoes for anyone, and he'd make 25 cents a pair. Years later, we discovered that Dad's earnings from shining shoes was how we got all those souvenirs from all those exotic ports of call. Well, what about the string? Why would you pack string, Dad? Well, the string was used to gift wrap all those presents that we got. Listen to this, y'all. My dad would meticulously place, let's say, the conga drums or the wood-carved boat in a box, and he would use the newspapers that he read from ports like Panama or Rio de Janeiro. He'd use the newspapers and he'd wrap the boxes with these newspapers, and then he'd take the string and secure the package. Opening the box was often just as exciting as receiving the gift. Looking back, the way my father perfectly packed our gifts, as if packing diamonds or rubies, was a master class in and of itself. The object lesson? Ricky, how you do anything is how you do everything. I cannot tell you how profoundly valuable that is to me today. But why? Why did it take my dad a month to pack? It didn't take him a month. He intentionally used that time to purposely prepare for every single scenario he could imagine. The lesson? Son, you'd rather have it and not need it than need it and not have it. I want to tell you, if your transistor radio runs out of power between Fiji and the Hawaiian Islands and you don't have extra batteries, you ain't listening to nothing but the waves. My father's leadership class did not include a module on luck. In fact, I don't think I ever heard in 42 years my father use the word luck. Rather, I heard him use the word preparation on a daily basis. Preparation, the second building block to growing effective leaders. The world was my dad's classroom. His curriculum was based on common sense and applied through the wisdom of discipline, moderation, focus, vision, order. My dad's steps were ordered. He never took a misstep. It was purposeful. His steps were powerful. His steps were intentional. You see, friends, great people do things other people don't. Great leaders do things other people won't. Influential leaders impact. My father learned by reading and listening and experiencing. His teachers, as I mentioned, were situations and circumstances and issues and problems and challenges, all compelling him to grow daily and causing him to prepare constantly. He ordered his steps through discipline and moderation and focus and vision. That was very, very important to him, which leads me to the third building block that establishes the foundation for genuine leadership. It's disrupting your own thinking. Disrupting thinking. Disrupting existing patterns and paradigms. Disrupting the way that you traditionally go through the day. The way you traditionally approach your day. I want you right now to think about what your routine is every day and how you approach it. Now, if you're on top of your game, if you're functioning at the highest level that you know you can, no reason to change. But I would dare say 99.9% of us are not. My dad challenged himself to disrupt his own paradigms and his own patterns of thinking and his own patterns of doing. Why? So that he could be a more effective leader. Let me explain to you with this very personal, poignant example from my dad's life. For years, my dad had a superior who shall remain anonymous for obvious reasons. The staff always talked about this superior, their boss, who, according to other staff members, had it out for every single employee. They said that the boss was just an evil man. Now, I heard this from my dad's coworkers. I never heard my dad mention that one time, though I'm sure my father was subject to the rude treatment of this man. My father never mentioned it. Decades later, after this gentleman had passed, after my father had retired, and when I was at an age of understanding, I brought this subject up. I mentioned this man by name to my father, who told me, son, in order to survive, in order to keep growing, I had to change my thinking. It wasn't about changing him. I had to change my thinking about how I thought about my boss. I chose to treat him with kindness and respect, regardless of how he treated me. My dad changed his thinking. He befriended the superior, never spoke a negative word about the man in our presence. In fact, our father told us to affectionately refer to this man as Uncle So-and-so, and we did his entire time at Cal Maritime. I learned so much from that one conversation with my father. The biggest lesson, you're probably not going to change another person, but you can change yourself. And it begins with disrupting your own thinking. Let me give you another example quickly of disruptive thinking. For years, I had poor eating and exercise habits. I ate whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted, and however much I wanted, while living a very inactive, sedentary lifestyle. I weighed over 300 pounds. I was always tired. I was always out of breath. I always ached, not to mention high blood pressure and cholesterol levels through the roof. However, my thinking justified my lifestyle. Though morbidly obese, the medical term for being fat, I hid behind tailored suits. A busy schedule convinced me that I was valued and needed and thus okay. And 20 minutes every other day of riding a stationary bicycle allowed me to classify myself as physically active. If one asks, Rick, how's your health? My answer would always be, I feel pretty good. Things are going well. I'm fine. The vagueness of my justifications should have been a sign of my foggy thinking. What changed? My thinking had to change, and it did. My thinking was dramatically disrupted. You see, friends, at some point in my life, I started hearkening back to when I was a widower. I know all too well what it feels like to be a widower. I know that feeling, and I didn't want that for my wife. I lived for a while in a home filled with grief and loneliness and despair, me and my 2 children. I know what it's like to have your hopes and dreams shattered in 1 second. And suddenly, I realized that I was setting my wife up for the very same thing, that I was setting up my children and my grandchildren to be without Poppy and to be without Dad, that if I really loved them more than I loved my desire for excessive eating and inactivity, something had to change. My thinking had to change. All this led me on a journey that I'm still walking out today. It's been a few years, but outwardly I've gone from 330 pounds to 180 pounds, but that's not the big miracle, in my opinion. I mean, I'm grateful, but losing the weight, that's not the biggest victory. My greatest accomplishment was that I disrupted my own thinking. That's right. My habits shifted. My routines changed. Better health choices have resulted. You know, people ask me every day, Rick, how'd you lose the weight? Rarely does a person ask me, why did you lose the weight? Authentic, genuine leaders who impact, rarely ask how to grow influence. They're consumed with the question, why is influence critical to our culture of success? Right now, friends, as I close, I want you to stop what you're doing. Stop what you're doing and ask yourself a simple question. What are the thoughts that keep you in prison right now? What are the thoughts in your mind right now that keep you captive, that prevent you from changing your reality? Why not take a page from the playbook of a 3rd grade dropout and, starting this very moment, disrupt your own thinking? Well, that's going to do it for this episode. Until we meet again, this is Dr. Rick, asking the most important question I can ask. How you living?
Are you ready to make an impact in your world right now? Do you want to stop existing and start living your best life right now? Dr. Rick wants to give you the first chapter of his best-selling book, Lessons from a 3rd Grade Dropout, absolutely free. Just go to www.rickrigsby.com/free gift to get the print or audiobook right now.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.